Welcome, boys and girls. I'm Mr. Randy. Glad to see you again. I miss being in your classroom, but I'm glad you're here with me today. Remember, when we read, it's not a passive activity. We use our eyes, ears, mouth, hands, and sometimes we need to use our whole body when we read. The first story we're going to read today is King Hugo's Huge Ego by Chris Van Dusen. Long ago, when people spoke with words like thou and thee, there lived a king named Hugo, who was only 3'3", and though this mini monarch stood no higher than an elf, his ego was enormous. He thought highly of himself. Yes, Hugo was a cocky king, as boastful as could be. To him no other person was as wonderful as he. He made his subjects bow to him whenever he was nigh. It pleased him to look down on them each time that he went by. And every Friday morning at precisely 10:30, his guards called all the people to the tower base, and then King Hugo cleared his throat and gave his captive congregation a lengthy talk he liked to call the speech of adoration. For hours the poor villagers endured the boring buzz of how mighty and magnificent King Hugo thought he was. One day King Hugo climbed aboard his coach of gleaming gold to watch the peasants bow to him as down the road he rolled. But when he turned a corner by a field of amber hay, a maiden with a heavy load was blocking up the way. The heralds blew their trumpets, then called out to the lass, "Step aside and bow your head. Allow the king to pass." The girl, whose name was Tessa, said bluntly, "Go around." She didn't want to drop her load and bow to the ground. The king began to rant and rave and spout and spit and sputter. "Roll on," he barked, and then they bumped poor Tessa to the gutter. They knocked her over. She landed in a rivulet. Oh, what a muddy mess, but little did King Hugo know she was a sorceress, the kind with special powers like a wizard or a witch. So she cast a spell upon the king while mired in the ditch. "A pox on you, O cocky king in robes of ruby red. Let's see if all your arrogance can fit inside your head." The next day, when the king awoke, he climbed down from his bed and gazed into his looking-glass admiringly and said, "I do believe, dear Hugo, you're more handsome than last night." But when he put his crown back on, it felt a little tight. Then he donned his crimson robe, the one with ermine fringe. "How grand I am," the king explained, and felt a little twinge. His crown seemed even tighter now, yet Hugo didn't care. He hollered from his window to the people in the square, "Say, who's the most majestic king? 'Tis I, you must admit." But when he pulled his head back in, it almost didn't fit. Every time he claimed to be the greatest in the land, the king perceived a tingle, and he felt his head expand. But he continued bragging in his overstated way, and so his head kept bloating, bulging bigger every day. By Friday, Hugo's head was huge, but still he didn't know that his self-directed compliments had caused his head to grow. His speech of adoration was scheduled as before, but when he reached the tower, he could not fit through the door. He marched across the courtyard to climb the open stair, then called the people to the wall and gave his speech from there. "Behold, my lowly subjects, and do not doubt thine eyes, for ye, my noble noggin, has increased tenfold in size. I know not how this happened, but now there's even more of your absolutely fabulous King Hugo to adore." The more he talked, the more he grew, till suddenly a squall hit the king's gigantic head and pitched him off the wall. Ah! He floated freely through the air, then landed with a thud. He bobbed and dipped and flipped and skipped and toppled through the mud. He tumbled topsy-turvy as he bounced along the lane, and ended up by Tessa, who was busy stacking grain. King Hugo's head was spinning. He felt dizzy, dazed, and beat. But when he noticed Tessa, he yelled, "Get me to my feet." Tessa wandered over. "Unbelievable," she sighed. "Did you ever stop and wonder why your head is 10 feet wide?" It's your ego, it's annoying, so I cast a little spell, and every pompous thing you've said has caused your head to swell. That's ludicrous, ridiculous, preposterous, insane. I'm humbler than anyone, the king snapped in disdain. I'll prove it to you, she replied. You've been this way for years. Just listen, ordered Tessa. Then she grabbed and tweaked his ears. Suddenly, a blast of air exploded from his head, along with all the haughty things Hugo'd ever said. I rule, glorious, look at me. Bow down, praise me, I'm so magnificent. King Hugo's head deflated like a giant pink balloon, and when he heard what he'd said, he felt like a buffoon. Sheepishly, he said to her, I do apologize. Then he looked at Tessa with his big, sad puppy eyes. Their glances met, and instantly she felt her heart go zing. Could it be, deep down inside, she kind of liked the king? The king got up. He took her hand and bent down on his knee. He gazed at her with tenderness, then spoke most humbly. Your spell has opened up my eyes. I've been unkind and rude. Please stay with me and teach me how to change my attitude. What happened next was kismet, yet truly unforeseen. He became a better man, and she became a queen. They ruled the kingdom kindly in a fair and friendly way, and everyone lived happily forever and a day. The end. Our next story is The Circus Ship by Chris Van Dusen. 5 miles off the coast of Maine and slightly overdue, a circus ship was steaming south in fog as thick as stew. On board were 15 animals who traveled to and fro. The next day it was Boston for another circus show. The captain, Mr. Carrington, was honest and sincere. He thought that they should drop the hook and wait for things to clear. But Mr. Payne, the circus boss, was terribly demanding. He stomped up to the helm where Captain Carrington was standing and screamed, Don't stop, keep going, I've got a show to do. Just get me down to Boston town tomorrow, sir, by 2. Then came a crash, an awful bash. Things flew into the air. The ship had smashed into a ledge that no one knew was there. The shattered ship began to tip, then sank without a sound. The splashing, thrashing animals swam round and round and round. The captain said to Mr. Payne, Pray tell, what shall we do? We can't just leave them there to drown. We've got to save them too. The animals, yelled Mr. Payne. Why, sir, what are you, daft? It's me that you should rescue. Pull me up into the raft. Now ferry me to safety, sir, before I die of cold. Don't question me, barked Mr. Payne. Just do as you are told. Through chilly water all night long the animals swam on until they reached an island beach just before the dawn. They pulled themselves up on the shore, bedraggled, cold and beat, then staggered to the village on weary, wobbly feet. The people in the neighborhood had just begun to rise, and when they saw those animals, they had to rub their eyes. They thought that they saw an elephant, but wait, how could that be? And what's that little monkey doing in the cherry tree? Soon animals were everywhere and into everything. There's an ostrich in the outhouse. There's a hippo in the spring. There's a tiger in the tulips. There's a lion on the lawn. There's a python in the pantry. It went on and on and on. Mr. Hood was stacking wood and nearly jumped a mile when he found the alligator sleeping on his pile. And Mrs. Dottie Daly, who grew daisies by the bunch, discovered that the zebra had been eating them for lunch. And Miss Fanny Feeney found, according to the rumors, that silly little circus monkey swinging in her bloomers. But everything changed quickly, like the turning of a tide, the night the Abbott's shed caught fire, with Emma Rose inside. From high above the Abbott's farm, the tiger saw the shed. The sight of smoke and fire triggered something in his head. He jumped through flames 1,000 times back in his circus days, so he ran past all the people, and he leapt into the blaze. Then everybody panicked. Help, help, what can we do? When from the raging fire, something big burst into view. It was the most amazing sight, and everybody froze when they saw the tiger saving little Emma Rose. The tiger's risky rescue changed everybody's mind. The animals weren't bothersome. The animals were kind. And so they lived together, side by side. They got along. It didn't seem like anything could possibly go wrong. Then Little Red the messenger came running with the word. Apparently a circus ship had sunk from what he'd heard. The animals are from that boat they swam in from the bay. The greedy owner wants them back. He'll be here any day. So the people called a meeting and they quickly hatched a plan. No animal that came ashore would sail off with that man. The next day at the crack of dawn, a ship was at the pier, and up upon the lane marched Mr. Payne, whose voice was loud and clear. I am the circus owner. My ship sank in the murk. I've come to find my animals and put them back to work. He hiked until he came into the center of the town. His face was red. He scratched his head. He stood there with a frown. Mr. Payne looked high and low, but still he couldn't see the 15 circus animals of his menagerie. He ran around the alleyways. He searched the village square. He even checked the chicken coop. His animals weren't there. Mr. Payne was tuckered out. His heavy chest was heaving. Then Little Red stepped up and said, I think your boat is leaving. He ran in a fit of rage. His ship was leaving sight, so he jumped into a rowboat and he rowed with all his might. And from that day, they like to say, their lives were free of pain. It was a happy, peaceful place upon that isle in Maine. The end.